Good evening, this is Mr. Wintermelon. So you have learned that we ingest food, digest them and absorb them. The food is then transported to the rest of our body by our transport system. So what happened to the digested food after they are transported to our cell? What will happen is known as respiration. So just a brief outline of this series of lessons. We will first learn what is aerobic respiration versus anaerobic respiration in this video. Then in the next video, you will learn the anatomy of the respiratory system, the mechanism of breathing, and lastly, smoking and lung disease. What you will learn at the end of this lesson is define the equation in words as well as symbol for aerobic respiration. State and define the equation in words only for anaerobic respiration in humans. So just take note, you only need to know this in human. Then lastly, describe the effect of lactic acid in muscle during exercise. And I think after as well, because they do test on after. First of all, what is respiration? Respiration is the breaking down of food molecules to release energy. Take note, it is release of energy. And when you answer your question, please do not write produce energy, because those assholes in Cambridge will not give you the mark, they will penalize you. Why we cannot say produce energy or loss of energy? Because energy can neither be created or destroyed. Physics stuff. So just take note, you write release of energy, don't write produce. As we have learned earlier, there's aerobic as well as anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration, there are two of them. Alcoholic fermentation, which you do not have to know, as well as lactic acid production. For aerobic respiration, it is the production of large amount of energy in the presence of oxygen. So for aerobic respiration, if you have paid attention to the syllabus outline, you will need to know both the symbol as well as the word equation. The word equation is fairly simple. Glucose in the presence of oxygen will give you energy plus carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide and water are the waste product. What you want here is energy. The energy are in the form of ATP. If you are interested, oxygen here is the final electron acceptor, and it will go on to become part of the water that is produced. Yeah, you can produce water, but you cannot produce energy. You release the energy from the glucose. The carbon dioxide came from the glucose. So you can see that glucose, there's 6 carbon. Those 6 carbon in glucose will become the carbon in carbon dioxide. So in summary, aerobic respiration is the release of large amount of energy in the presence of oxygen. For anaerobic respiration, alcoholic fermentation that occurs in yeast is something that you do not have to know because it's not in the syllabus. But if you are interested, it is also the process where you produce alcohol or ethanol and it will give little energy. What we are more interested to learn is lactic acid production. This anaerobic respiration occurs when there is a lack of oxygen. You can compare and contrast anaerobic respiration with aerobic respiration. You can see that for anaerobic respiration, glucose is straight away converted to lactic acid, releasing energy. But the amount of energy released is very little. This occurs in muscle cell and will lead to fatigue because of the lactic acid. This anaerobic respiration, you can actually experience it yourself at the comfort of your own home or by watching this video. Find a wall and do a phantom chair. Make sure that your legs are 90 degrees to the wall. Make sure your hands are not touching your thigh. Even if you are touching, you should get tired after 2 or 3 minutes. So after a while, you will find yourself unable to hold on, then you will need a rest. Why does this occur? Because phantom chair is actually quite a high intensity exercise as compared to just sitting on your plain old chair. And because this exercise is high in intensity, eventually there will be a shortage of oxygen. So during high intensity exercise, your muscle will require high amount of oxygen for aerobic respiration. This is to release sufficient amount of energy for our muscle contraction. When there's insufficient oxygen to keep up with the demand of our muscle cell, they will undergo anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration occurs when the demand of oxygen is high and there is insufficient oxygen. That means the amount of air we breathe in cannot keep up with the intensity of our exercise. After we switch to anaerobic respiration, lactic acid will start to accumulate in the muscle. When the rate of production is higher than the rate that they are being transported away, it will cause muscle fatigue as well as soreness. Because lactic acid is an acid, 酸嘛, so our muscle will 酸. And when our muscle is 酸ning, we say that our muscle cells have incurred oxygen debt. So after doing your phantom chair and you find your bed or a chair to sit down, you will still find yourself breathing heavily after this high intensity exercise. Why do you need to breathe heavily when you are seated on a chair, you might ask? This is because our body needs to repay the oxygen debt. So after a high intensity exercise, we will continue to breathe at a faster rate. This is to provide sufficient oxygen to repay the oxygen debt. Oxygen is needed to convert the lactic acid back into glucose. Lactic acid is removed from our muscle and transported to the liver. So in the liver, our lactic acid might be oxidized to produce energy, or they get converted back into glucose. This conversion back into glucose actually requires energy as well. And the amount of energy needed is actually more than the energy that is released when glucose is being broken down into lactic acid, which is why we call it an oxygen debt, because your body owes that amount of oxygen to convert the lactic acid back into glucose. Oxygen debt is repaid when all the lactic acid is used up. Now, before we go off, I will talk about high intensity exercise and low intensity exercise. Compare marathon and 100-meter sprint. Which one do you think is the high intensity exercise and which one do you think is the low intensity exercise? Intuitively, you would think that marathon must be very tiring. Therefore, marathon is the high intensity exercise. However, let us look at the world record for marathon as well as 100-meter sprint. For marathon is actually 42.2 kilometer run. And the world record is 2 hours, 1 minute and 39 seconds. As for the case of 100-meter sprint, the world record is actually 9.58 seconds. Now, you can do some simple maths. Distance divided by time will give you the speed, and if you use the speed to run your 100-meter sprint, you can actually complete the marathon in slightly over 67 minutes. That's 1 hour plus a bit. So clearly, the intensity of 100-meter sprint is actually a lot higher than the marathon. So as a result, 100-meter sprint is actually higher intensity than the marathon. And your muscle will need to contract faster to enable yourself to run at such a speed. Therefore, during high intensity exercise, you are actually using a lot of anaerobic respiration because there is insufficient oxygen since the demand of oxygen is very high, and there will be insufficient oxygen as a result. Therefore, your muscle will mainly use anaerobic respiration for your 100-meter sprint. As for the case of marathon, the intensity is not as high if you are doing it correctly. If you are not doing it correctly, you will get your soreness and so on when you are not even done with half the race. So if you pace yourself correctly, your body will be mainly using aerobic respiration for marathon. Therefore, you will not release so much lactic acid and your body will probably be able to clear them, and you will not get cramped halfway through the race. So in summary, marathon is the low intensity exercise, while 100-meter sprint is the high intensity exercise. And as a result, for 100-meter sprint, you will be mainly using anaerobic respiration, while for marathon, you will be mainly using aerobic respiration.